Now, let's start out by showcasing our fighters this evening. First, we have our Mox Pro patron Brandon, piloting Marwyn the Nurturer. This deck seeks to cast and grow Marwyn using lots of elf synergies. It then generates big mana through its commander and overwhelms the table through infinite combos or huge trampling creatures. Next, we have Playing with Power member Ashani, piloting Talion, the Kindly Lord. This is a control deck that seeks to accrue advantage with its commander. It stops opponents' game plans and eventually wins with Oracle or Bloodchief's Ascension. After that, we have Playing with Power member Alana, piloting the partner pair of Rograkh, son of Rograkh, and Silas Wren, Seeker Adept. This is a Grixis list that seeks to resolve a card advantage engine like Ad Nauseam or Rhystic Study. It then wins with Thassa's Oracle or Underworld Breach. Finally, we have our Mox Pro patron Peter from Wizards of the Coast, piloting Kenrith, the Return King. This deck seeks to use its commander to gain advantage through its many abilities. It then executes one of many combos using Dockside, Oracle, or Underworld Breach. Without further ado, let's kick off this ordinary organic organized organism. Brandon won the game of Can't Touch This and gets to start us off. But Alana has a pre-game action, putting Gemstone Caverns onto the battlefield, exiling Scalding Tarn. Brandon draws a card for turn and plays a forest. He casts a Mana Crypt. He casts his commander, Marwyn the Nurturer. He casts a Lotus Petal. He cracks it to cast Delighted Halfling. Brandon passes. Ashani draws and plays a Manamo, School at Water's Edge. He passes. Alana draws and plays a Verdant Catacombs. She cracks it, pays a life, and fetches up an Underground Sea onto the battlefield. She casts Arcane Signet. She casts her commander, Rograkh, son of Rograkh. She casts Paradise Mantle. She equips Mantle to Rograkh and ships the turn to Peter. Peter draws, plays a Command Tower, and passes. During his upkeep, Brandon loses his Mana Crypt roll and takes 3 damage. He draws and casts an Elvish Mystic. Marwyn triggers and gets a +1/+1 counter. He casts Selvala, Heart of the Wilds. Marwyn triggers and gets another counter. Brandon ends his turn. Ashani draws and plays a Mana Confluence. He taps it to help cast out Counterbalance. He casts Chromox, imprinting Stern Scolding. Ashani passes the turn. Alana draws and casts a Mana Crypt. Counterbalance triggers, and Ashani reveals a Dark Ritual. Alana plays a Marsh Flats for turn. She cracks it, pays a life, and fetches up a Badlands onto the battlefield. She casts Praetor's Grasp, targeting Peter. She fetches up a card from Peter's library into exile face down. She casts the One Ring from exile. It enters, and Alana gains protection from everything. She activates the One Ring, adding a burning counter and drawing a card. Alana ships the turn. Peter draws and plays an Underground Sea. He casts Phantasmal Image. It enters as a copy of Selvala. Peter passes. During his upkeep, Brandon wins his Mana Crypt roll. He draws and casts his own One Ring. It enters and Brandon gains protection from everything. He activates the One Ring, adding a counter and drawing a card. He casts a Jeweled Lotus and ships the turn to Ashani. Ashani draws and plays a Cephalid Colosseum for turn. He taps it to help cast a Rhystic Study. Ashani ends his turn. During her upkeep, Alana loses a life to the One Ring. She also wins her Mana Crypt roll. She draws and activates the One Ring, adding a counter and drawing 2 cards. She plays a Watery Grave into play untapped, paying 2 life. She casts her other commander, Silas Wren, Seeker Adept, paying for Rhystic. Alana gives the turn to Peter. Peter draws and plays a Badlands. He casts a Witchclaw Talisman. Counterbalance and Rhystic trigger, and in response, Alana flashes in an Orcish Bowmasters. Rhystic triggers and Ashani draws. It enters, pings Delighted Halfling, and Alana masses Orcs 1. Then Ashani draws through Rhystic, Bowmasters triggers, kills Halfling, and Alana amasses. Then Ashani reveals an Opposition Agent through Counterbalance, and Witchclaw resolves. He activates Selvala, adding 2 white to cast Grand Abolisher. Counterbalance and Rhystic trigger, Ashani draws, Bowmasters triggers, pings Elvish Mystic, and Alana amasses. Then Ashani reveals a land off of Counterbalance, and with Abolisher still in the stack, Brandon hard casts Force of Vigor, targeting Rhystic and Counterbalance, paying for Rhystic. In response, Ashani taps Mana Confluence to cast a Swan Song. Force is countered, and Brandon creates a 2/2 bird. Then Abolisher resolves, and Peter passes the turn. During his upkeep, Brandon loses his Mana Crypt roll and takes 3 damage. He also loses a life to the One Ring. He draws and activates the One Ring, adding a counter and drawing 2. Bowmasters triggers twice, kills Grand Abolisher, and Alana amasses 2. Brandon casts Leaf Crown Visionary, paying for Rhystic. Marwyn triggers and gets a +1/+1 counter. He casts Rishkar's Expertise, paying for Rhystic again. Then Brandon draws 5 cards and casts Dusk Watch Recruiter. Counterbalance, Rhystic, and 5 Bowmasters trigger. Alana kills Marwyn, amasses 5, Ashani draws through Rhystic, Bowmasters triggers, Alana targets Peter's Selvala, and Phantasmal Image triggers, and then Peter sacrifices it. Then Ashani ignores Counterbalance, and Recruiter resolves. Brandon plays a Gaia's Cradle for turn. Finished up, Brandon passes. Ashani draws and plays a Morphic Pool. He casts a Jeweled Lotus. He cracks it to help cast his commander, Talion the Kindly Lord. It enters, and Ashani chooses 1. Ashani ends his turn. During her upkeep, Alana loses 2 life to the One Ring. She also wins her Mana Crypt roll. She draws and activates the One Ring. In response, Ashani casts Dark Ritual, adding 3 black. He flashes in a Notion Thief. It enters, and in response to the One Ring, Alana casts Snap, targeting Notion Thief. Counterbalance and Rhystic trigger, Alana doesn't pay, and Ashani declines to draw due to Bowmasters. Then Ashani reveals a copy artifact through Counterbalance, countering the spell. Then Alana adds a counter, and Ashani draws 3 cards through Notion Thief. Bowmasters triggers 3 times, kills Notion Thief, pings Talion twice, and Alana amasses 3. Next, Alana casts Mystic Remora, paying for Rhystic. Talion and counterbalance triggers, and Ashani reveals Demonic Consultation, countering Remora. Then Alana loses 2, and Ashani draws a card through Talion. She moves to combat and attacks Ashani with Silas and her Orc army. Ashani takes 16, and Alana ends her turn. Peter draws and plays a Flooded Strand. He cracks it, pays a life, and fetches up a Tundra onto the battlefield. He activates Wishclaw, fetching up a card into his hand and giving Wishclaw to Ashani. He casts Silence. Rhystic, Talion, and counterbalance trigger. Ashani reveals a flesh duplicate, then Peter loses 2 and Ashani draws. Bowmaster's triggers, Alana pings Ashani, amasses 1, then Ashani draws through Rhystic. Bowmaster's triggers again, Alana pings Ashani again, and amasses 1. In response to Silence, Brandon activates Duskwatch Recruiter, looking at the top 3, failing to find. Then Brandon casts Crop Rotation, sacrificing a forest as an additional cost. Rhystic, counterbalance, and Talion trigger, Brandon loses 2 and Ashani draws. Bowmaster's triggers, Alana pings Ashani, amasses 1, then Ashani reveals a mana drain through counterbalance, then Ashani draws through Rhystic, and Crop Rotation resolves. Brandon fetches up an Ancient Tomb onto the battlefield. Then Silence resolves, locking out opponents this turn. Peter casts Dockside Extortionist. Counterbalance, Rhystic, and Talion trigger, Peter loses 2 and Ashani draws. Bowmaster's triggers, Alana pings Ashani and amasses 1, Ashani draws through Rhystic. Bowmaster's triggers again, Alana pings Ashani and amasses 1 again, then Ashani reveals a Trick Bind, countering Dockside. Unfortunately stopped through counterbalance, Peter passes the turn. During his upkeep, Brandon loses 2 life to the One Ring. He also wins his Mana Crypt roll. He draws and plays a Yavimaya, Cradle of Growth for turn. He casts Autumn's Veil. Counterbalance, Rhystic, and Talion trigger, Brandon loses 2 and Ashani draws. Alana pings Ashani through Bowmasters and amasses 1. Brandon pays for Rhystic, then Ashani reveals a Dispel through counterbalance, countering the spell. Brandon activates the One Ring, adding a counter and drawing 3 cards. Bowmasters triggers 3 times, Alana pings Ashani for 3, and then amasses 3. He casts Scale Up, targeting Duskwatch Recruiter. Talion and counterbalance trigger, Ashani reveals a Dispel, countering Scale Up. Brandon loses 2 and Ashani draws, then Bowmasters pings Ashani and Alana amasses. He casts Finehorn Elves. Counterbalance, Rhystic, and Talion trigger, Brandon loses 2 and Ashani draws, and Alana pings Ashani with Bowmasters and amasses 1. Then Ashani ignores Rhystic and counterbalance, and Elves resolves. He taps his Ancient Tomb and cracks his Jewel Lotus to help recast his commander, Marwyn the Nurturer. Counterbalance, Rhystic, and Talion trigger, Brandon loses 2 and Ashani draws, Alana pings Ashani through Bowmasters and amasses 1, and Ashani ignores Rhystic and counterbalance. Brandon moves to combat and attacks Ashani with everything. Ashani blocks Selvala with Talion and takes the rest. All through, Brandon passes. Ashani draws and plays an Underground River. He activates Wishclaw. In response, Alana casts Demonic Consultation. Counterbalance, Rhystic, and Talion trigger. Alana loses 2 and Ashani draws. Alana pings Ashani with Bowmasters and amasses 1. Ashani declines to draw through Rhystic and then reveals an Imposter Mech through counterbalance. In response, Ashani casts Dispel, countering Consult. Then Ashani fetches up a card into his hand and gives Wishclaw to Peter. Ashani taps his Cephalid Coliseum to help cast Thassa's Oracle. It enters, and with the trigger on the stack, Ashani taps his Mana Confluence to help cast Tainted Pact. Ashani exiles all but the last 3 cards of his library, putting Cyclonic Rift into his hand. Oracle's trigger resolves, and Ashani wins the game. Do you have extra cards lying around that you don't use? Want to buy or trade for some extra cards but don't know how to maximize the value? Then you should try out today's sponsor, Card Conduit. Card Conduit is the best service when it comes to selling your extra cards. Don't waste hours trying to find the best buy list price for your cards online. Simply send them to Card Conduit and let them take care of the rest. I have used Card Conduit multiple times already. I always use them to get the best value for my extra cards. I get fair prices for my cards and they save me tons of time. They have 3 main services. Their standard service lets you send them your unsorted cards of any value. They will sort, grade, and give you the best price for your cards. Their curated service is similar. Send them your unsorted cards worth over $1 in value. They will charge half the fee of the standard service and charge no fee per card. Their sorted service is a great value as well. Choose cards in advance with their selection tool, send them sorted to Card Conduit, and they will grade and buy list them automatically. Save yourself the time of having to send to multiple sites and let Card Conduit do it instead. Their fee is only 2% with no fee per card. They give you the best price for your cards. They work with competitive buy listing partners, including ones not open to the public. Users get an average of 19% more for their collection than they would from any major retail buy list, even with Card Conduit's fees. Card Conduit also optimizes buy listing for card condition as well. Since vendors have different penalties for wear and tear, Card Conduit will find the best buy list priced against the specific condition of the card. So give Card Conduit a try today. If you sign up with my link in the description below or use the promo code POWER, you will also get 10% off of their fees when you use their service. A big thanks to Card Conduit for sponsoring today's video. In this game, Ashani is piloting Corvold, Fake-Cursed King. This deck seeks to resolve a Dockside Extortionist to gain huge value off of its commander. It then wins with Food Chain Lines or Mayhem Devil, and Ashani gets to start us off. Ashani draws and plays a Blood Crypt into play untapped, paying 2 life. He casts a Deathrite Shaman and passes the turn. Alana draws and plays an Ancient Tomb. She casts her commander, Rograkh, son of Rograkh. She taps Ancient Tomb to help cast a Spring Leaf Drum. She casts Infernal Plunge, sacrificing Rograkh as an additional cost, adding 3 red. She casts the One Ring. In response, Peter casts Mindbreak Trap for its alternate cost, exiling the One Ring. Disappointed, Alana passes the turn. Peter draws and plays a City of Brass. He taps it to help cast a Birds of Paradise. Peter ends his turn. Brandon draws and plays a Forest. He casts Boreal Druid and ships the turn. Ashani draws and plays a Misty Rainforest. He cracks it, pays a life, and fetches up a Bayou onto the battlefield. He activates Deathrite Shaman, exiling his Misty Rainforest from his graveyard, adding a black. He casts Necropotence. Ashani activates Necropotence 7 times, paying 7 life, exiling 7 cards. He moves to his end step and puts the Necro cards into his hand. He passes, discarding the hand size, exiling the discarded cards. Alana draws and taps Ancient Tomb to help recast her commander, Rograkh, son of Rograkh. She plays a command tower for turn. She casts Demonic Tutor, fetching up a card into her hand. Alana gives the turn to Peter. Peter draws and plays a Tropical Island. He taps City of Brass to help cast a Wishclaw Talisman. Peter passes to Brandon. Brandon draws and plays a Forest. He casts his commander, Marwyn the Nurturer. He passes. Ashani skips his draw step due to Necropotence. He plays a Nurturing Peatland for turn. He casts Ragavan, Nimble Pilferer. He activates Necropotence 10 times, paying 10 life, exiling 10 cards. He moves to his end step and puts the Necro cards into his hand. He casts Dark Ritual, adding 3 black. He casts Cabal Ritual, adding 3 more black. He casts Entomb, fetching up a Squee the Immortal into his graveyard. He taps Nurturing Peatland to help cast Assassin's Trophy, targeting Marwyn. Marwyn is destroyed, and Brandon fetches up a Forest onto the battlefield. Then Ashani activates Deathrite Shaman, exiling Alana's Demonic Tutor, and each opponent loses 2 life. Then Ashani discards the hand size, exiling the discarded cards. Alana draws and plays a Verdant Catacombs. She casts Wheel of Fortune. In response, Brandon casts Force of Vigor for its alternate cost, exiling a green card, targeting Necropotence and Wishclaw Talisman. Both are destroyed, then Wheel resolves. Each player discards their hand and draws 7. Next, Alana cracks Verdant Catacombs, pays a life, and fetches up an Underground Sea onto the battlefield. She casts a Mana Crypt. Alana ends her turn. Peter draws and casts Chrome Mox, imprinting Savine's Reclamation. He taps City of Brass to help cast Culling Ritual. In response, Alana casts Flusterstorm with all copies targeting Ritual, countering the spell. Peter passes. Brandon draws and plays a Gaia's Cradle. He recasts his commander, Marwyn the Nurturer. Brandon ends his turn. Ashani draws and moves to combat. He attacks Peter with Ragavan. Peter takes it, Ragavan triggers, Ashani creates a treasure, and Peter exiles a Snap off of the top of his library. In his second main phase, Ashani plays a Polluted Delta. He cracks it, pays a life, and fetches up an Overgrown Tomb onto the battlefield untapped, paying 2 life. He activates Deathrite Shaman, exiling Polluted Delta, adding a black. He casts a Culling Ritual of his own. Each non-land permanent with mana value 2 or less is destroyed, and Ashani adds 3 green and 4 black. He casts Ad Nauseam. Ashani reveals a Final Fortune, Mana Crypt, Command Tower, Worldly Tutor, Wheel of Fortune, Exotic Orchard, City of Brass, Veil of Summer, Rite of Flame, Rate of Filth, Taiga, Beseiju Who Endures, and an Underworld Breach, deciding to stop there. He casts Rite of Flame, adding 2 red. He casts Mana Crypt. He casts Final Fortune, getting an extra turn. He casts his commander, Corvold, Fey Cursed King. It enters, and Ashani sacrifices Nurturing Peatland. Corvold triggers, gets a +1/+1 counter, and Ashani draws. Ashani moves to his next turn, discarding the hand size. During his upkeep, Ashani loses his Mana Crypt roll and takes 3 damage. He draws and plays an Exotic Orchard. He casts Underworld Breach. He casts Rain of Filth. He sacrifices Blood Crypt to Rain of Filth, adding a black. Corvold triggers, gets a counter, and Ashani draws. He sacrifices Overgrown Tomb, adding a black, drawing through Corvold. He escapes Cabal Ritual with Threshold, adding 5 black. He escapes Animate Dead, returning Dosen, the Falling Leaf, from his graveyard to the battlefield. He casts Food Chain. He activates Food Chain, exiling Corvold, adding 6 red. He casts Squee from his graveyard through its ability. He exiles Squee to Food Chain, adding 4 red. He presents a loop of casting and exiling Squee over and over, netting infinite red. He uses that red to repeat the loop, adding infinite black and infinite green. He escapes Mayhem Devil. He recasts his commander, Corvold, sacrificing Squee and drawing a card through Corvold, pinging Alana through Mayhem Devil. He escapes Entomb, fetching up Skirk Prospector into his graveyard. He escapes Skirk Prospector. He activates Skirk, sacrificing Squee, adding a red. Mayhem Devil triggers and pings Alana. He presents a loop of casting Squee from his graveyard with his infinite mana, then sacrificing it to Skirk for a red, pinging an opponent. He does this over and over until the table is dead, and Ashani wins the game. Ladies and gentlemen, what a match. Congrats to Ashani on both of his wins. In Game 1, his advantage engines and counterbalance proved to be too much for the table to handle. He was able to control the board, draw tons of cards, and closed out the game. In Game 2, Ashani was able to land an early Necropotence to pull way ahead on advantage. He then waited for everyone to go shields down before closing it out with the Food Chain loop. The most valuable card in tonight's games, sponsored by Luxury Playstyle, goes to Counterbalance. Game 1 would not have ended up the way it did if it wasn't for this enchantment. Over and over, players had to blind cast into it due to Ashani's card draw engines. Many times they got countered at no resource cost to Ashani, and he was able to hold down the table until he could close it out. Thank you so much for watching, and check out this video to see if Francisco Foul Marauder is CEDH viable.